Hello, and welcome to Devlog number 38. At this point, the majority of the tools that I anticipate needing to build the official campaign are either done or roughly implemented. It's kind of been a case of laying the track while I'm driving the train because I'll get a couple minutes in the editor, realize I'm missing something that I need or something isn't working exactly the way that I want it to. I'll go back, work on the editor a little bit more, and then go back to actually building the campaign, but I've gotten a lot of progress done on it. I always have to stress this, but nothing is final until it releases, but this is the layout for the overworld right now. It's zone-based, where there's an introductory area where the player will only encounter things like shuttles and tugs, and then move into monitors and maybe a journeyman before they get to the gas giant, where they'll encounter things like marauders, CLNs, maybe a full carrier, maybe an Ocello, and then by the time you get to the inner asteroid belt, it's the gloves are off, take everything that you've learned throughout the campaign from here, and put it to use in the final sprint to the finish where everything can be thrown against you. I've said before that I don't want to spoil anything for the plot, but fortunately there's a room right here at the start of the game called Crucible, which is just a simple battle room, and there's no major plot points or anything, so it's kind of the perfect room to give a demo of how a room plays through, and then go back into the editor and show you all of the tools that I use to create that. And also a note before we start, all the dialogue that you're going to see in here is just placeholder. We haven't written any of the actual dialogue yet. This is just me roughing something in to give an example of what the mood is going to be, or like what kind of things are happening. So without further ado, here is Crucible. So that's the introduction to this room, and from here the player is given control, given this additional light cruiser, and then told that there's going to be a number of enemy ships arriving in about 2 minutes. So that's a pretty straightforward setup for a simple battle room, and while we get set up here, I want to talk about the cutscene that you just played, which is both meant to look cool and immerse the player, but also kind of serve as stealth tutorials. Right there, you're seeing that the light cruiser is firing RPF at the shuttle, you're hearing all the different sound effects, you're seeing the light effects go out when the ship loses its drives and power, you're seeing the abandoned ship alarm, the evac announcements, that kind of stuff, and it's kind of just throwing in the player's thought process, these things mean these things. And I plan to use these cutscenes as a way to introduce players to mechanics in a much more organic way that doesn't require me to lecture them like the current game tutorials do, although those will still stick around for more in-depth explanations. The battle itself is going to be pretty simple because keep in mind this is either the first or second room that the player will have gone to. And also keep in mind that for a lot of players, this will be their very first battle in Nebulous ever. So you've got a carrier, 2 frigates, and a light cruiser against like 4 shuttles and a tug. The point difference is like 8 times or something like that. So anyone who knows roughly what they're doing is going to just steamroll right through this room, but it does serve as a simple and easy introduction to what a battle is like. And probably on the easier difficulty, there will only be one group of shuttles so that the player doesn't have to split their attention, but that's all dependent on playtesting. But again, the purpose of this is to gently guide the player and ramp up the difficulty as they go through the zones until they hit the final, here's everything that we can throw at you, take all the skills that you've learned, end of the campaign, or end of the first act rather. And now if you look into the distance, you can see a number of drive flares from the late arriving ships that the light cruiser was talking about at the end of the cutscene, and this is a new mechanic for the campaign, part of what I talked about in the last devlog, the ability to spawn ships at will and make them arrive anytime that I want for narrative purposes. And now I'm just going to speed the clip up because I don't think anyone really wants to watch me play a full 10 minutes of this until we get to the actual interesting part, because this is just a really simple battle. I'm not a very good player, but it doesn't take that much skill to dumpster 4 shuttles and a tug. But again, this is meant for new players to get a handle on the battle mechanics there's a lot going on. The game's mechanics are very complicated, and so I want to make sure that I introduce these mechanics in a controlled and steady and very understandable way, and give the players space to experiment while they do it with easier challenges at the start, although on the harder difficulties, while those might not change the specific types of ships that you encounter. So, for example, the first zone will still always be shuttles and tugs, and then you'll get introduced to monitors. The number and varieties of ships may change. So, for example, rocket shuttles may be mixed in here, which are a bit of a hard threat for a new player to get used to because they can get the drop on you and really hurt you. But for a more experienced player, that will provide a little bit more of a challenge than just a couple gun shuttles. And then finally, we get to the end of the battle where we have one enemy ship left that I just need to finish off. And in the top right, you'll notice not only time controls, which are new for single player, because when I started having to basically go through these rooms over and over and over again, I really didn't want to have to keep typing the time commands into the console, and I knew that I was going to want this in the campaign eventually anyway for like the purpose of reloading while you're docked at a station. No one wants to sit there for 10 minutes of real time, so time controls were going to be important for that. But there's also a list of objectives where you can see that we've got locate light cruiser, and we'll be able to see on the overworld map where these objectives are. And then once the enemy ship has been eliminated, it gets completed. There's also going to be a pop-up in the center of the screen for when that happens, although it didn't work here and I didn't really want to play through the whole room again just to demonstrate that, but it will be there so that you can kind of know exactly when the completion happens, and you don't need to keep your eye in the top right the whole time. And then with that battle done, the player can decide where they want to go next, but for us, we're going to hop back over to the campaign editor and talk about all the tools that I used to build that encounter. There are a couple new resources on the overworld UI for the editor, such as showing where all of the ships are. And so you can enable this overlay and it will show you every ship in every room and who they belong to. You can hover over them for names and hull types or for ship template types. And these can also vary by difficulty. So if we flip through the easy, medium, and hard at the top, we can see that the number of ships in each room changes depending on what the spawn conditions for those ships are. There's also an objective overlay UI so that you can see what all of the objectives at all of the different rooms are going to be at a glance, and this is pretty much exactly the UI that the player will also see when they're playing the game. Although you'll see all of them, and in the game the player may see certain ones available at certain times rather than seeing all of them, but you can see them differentiated between primary and secondary objectives, primary being the filled in square and secondary being the plus sign. Secondary are going to be things like additional storyline options where you can kind of find out what's going on behind the scenes by like retrieving a beacon, or strengthen your fleet by retrieving a ship. You don't need to go do that, but primary objectives are things like destroying the Protectorate's supply lines, destroying their factories, destroying their shipyards, etc. Over here for cutscene resources, we have the NPC cast, which is any character that can be referenced in like dialogue or a cutscene or something. You can give them a portrait that is either bespoke, as in a specific image that was created for that purpose, or you can use the portrait set that we had created for Conquest that's going to get reused here. You can randomize the traits, you can lock specific attributes and randomize without changing those specific ones that you selected or locked. You can select the individual attributes with the arrows so you can page through until you find something that you like, and then once you apply the portrait, it will compress that down into a single layer sprite, and it can be used wherever. And then hopping into the room itself, the first thing that we'll talk about is the asteroid layout. Since this is not a map you're familiar with, it's a random layout of an asteroid field for testing purposes. We have concept art for about half of the locations in the campaign at this point, and some of them have actual blockouts that match that concept art, but this one does not. In order to build this testing layout, I used a procedural asteroid field generator that I wrote for this purpose, which has a bunch of options and a bunch of asteroids that it can use. So StephMo put together this huge pack of asteroid prefabs, and basically this generator will take from that set and it will procedurally place asteroids according to what parameters you set in the generator. It's really fun to watch too. You click generate and it just kind of like pops all the asteroids around and does test fits and trials and rotations until it either decides that it's happy with the placement or it gives up on that particular asteroid. And you can do this as many times as you want. You can either randomize the field with a new seed, or if you change parameters and want to see how the change in parameters changes the shape of the field without changing the seed, you can regenerate the field with that specific seed. You can change the radius of the field, you can change the density, you can change the weights of using specific types of asteroids. So if you don't want to use these gigantic or enormous asteroids, you can turn the weight down to 0 on those, and then it will just generate with the medium, small, and tiny rocks. You can also vary the dimensions of the field, so we can crush down the x-axis here and basically spawn a wall of asteroids that's smushed on the x-axis, although probably more realistically you'd use this on the y-axis to create a more flat field, which I'm going to do here. You can add exclusion areas, so we can put a large sphere here near the center of the map, and then when we regenerate the field, it will make sure that there are no asteroids placed in that particular spot. So if we wanted to have like a station there or an objective or something that we wanted to make sure stayed clear, we could put that exclusion area in, and then the generator will make sure that it stays empty. Overall, it's a really fun tool to use. It's made making realistic and randomized layouts of asteroids a lot easier than trying to place them by hand, because trying to place asteroids by hand in a way that looks realistically random while also having interesting cover and things is really hard to do, and this allows me to just shotgun layouts until I find something that I like. This is something I'd really love to get into the game as an actual game mechanic for a randomly generated asteroid field map. That's been on the roadmap for a really long time, and I've wanted it, a lot of players have wanted it, something to kind of keep each game fresh, although maybe not the most balanced outputs each time. But the biggest blocker on that is not so much generating the asteroid field, it is making it so that the nav graphs can be generated, because right now that is a very time and manual intensive process. It's been sped up quite a bit, and I've created a lot of tools to make them better with the carriers update, but it can take several minutes to generate those, and then it requires a little bit of manual massaging to make sure that there are paths everywhere and that there are no edges with not enough clearance, that kind of stuff. At some point, I'm going to take a look at making that multi-threaded and faster, and figuring out a way to make it so that it's something that's realistic to do during the loading process of a skirmish game rather than just an offline thing. For ship entities, the number of things that you can do has expanded quite a bit. Most of the top is the same from before, from the last devlog, although now you can actually change the template and the owner in place without having to delete and respawn the entity, because that would break a lot of references. And the difficulty spawning has been turned into a easy, medium, hard toggle, so you can, for example, change out which ships will spawn in a specific spot on each difficulty. So if you want a light cruiser here on easy and medium, but you want something else on hard, you could disable hard for this ship, replace it with another one that only spawns on hard. You can also edit damage for the ship at the start of the game by clicking this button, which brings up a DC board that you can use your mouse wheel to scroll on. You can scroll down the damage, scroll up the damage, you can click on them to destroy them or restore them, and this basically allows you to give the player ships that have been damaged through some other narrative event without it just being fresh and not really making sense for the ship's story. You could also edit the initial ammo load or what's been expended. So for example, the storyline is that the ship has been fighting for the last couple days, so some of its ammo obviously would have been expended from what the template says it should have. And then there's also a placeholder for editing armor damage, although that's not implemented yet. Over here are what's called spawn allocations, active allocation being the default one, which is where the ship is just here at the start of the game. You can have a docked allocation, so for example, you can make it so that the ship starts docked with a specific station, and if we select this, if there was a station here, we could select the specific docking point we want it to be at. Or you can use inactive spawn allocation to make it so that a ship is inactive at the start, which is what's used for these ships up here that are the late arriving ships, and then we'll go through how that arrival gets triggered in a minute. Unfortunately, the placement of this room on the map and how it connects to other rooms places some constraints on how I can either hide certain things from the player or expose them to certain things based on where they arrive from, because these routes to the different locations have an actual place in the room. And this creates some problems when I'm building maps, because I don't really have a reference for how the layout of the room is on the overworld when I'm building a map blockout. And it also creates a problem for mod maps if someone wants to use one in a custom campaign. So what I did was I made it so that you can actually rotate the map inside the room around the y-axis, and this actually works for the octree as well. Or more technically, the queries against the octree are inversely transformed by the map's rotation, and then the answer is transformed back out. So the octree is actually still fixed in space, but everything that's queried against it or returned from it is transformed by however the map is rotated. And this works for any arbitrary rotation even though the campaign editor only lets you turn the map around the y-axis. This opens up a lot more freedom with how you can build maps in the editor and import them into the campaign and still be able to make use of them in a room wherever you want when you move things around the overworld, or how you connect things, and it allows you to use maps that were not made with a campaign in mind and still be able to have them make sense in your world. Next up, we have campaign variables, which allows you to define a number of variables. These ones in this case are local to the room, but there are global variables as well. And this allows you to set values to signal certain scripts that certain things have happened and that they're now clear to execute, or allows you to set things that will persist between visits to the room so you know whether certain things were completed or whether certain things were encountered, and allow you to drive scripts that way. And then for the global variables, you can do things like a certain thing happened in this room, and then 5 rooms down the line, you know, oh, this thing happened, and so I should trigger this other event because of it. And this feeds nicely into the largest thing that has been added to the campaign editor, which is a script editor that is node-based. This thing, actually, I made this while I was sick, and between drinking cup after cup of tea and honey, I just kind of like came to, and all of a sudden this thing was in the game. And I don't really know how it got here. I knew that there had to be some way to script events in the campaign without having to go back and do C# code for every little thing that I wanted to trigger. And I could have done a text editor for something like Lua, but as someone who's been using Visual Studio for decades, trying to implement a featured code editor in the game that would have the quality of life features that I would expect to not make it an absolute nightmare for me to use would be way more work than actually making this node-based editor. And on the other plus side, a node-based editor is far more accessible for non-programmers. So in this case, it was a double win. There's already a really big set of nodes implemented, and you can access them through the right-click menu, which allow you to do all kinds of different things that we're going to go through as we walk through this graph, and a couple others. And adding your own nodes is really easy. The classes are very extensible, and declaring a new node type is as simple as just inheriting from the scriptable graph node and then writing your own code, adding the ports, that kind of stuff, and it will automatically be pulled in by the game and added to the list of nodes that you can add to the graph. This graph that we're looking at here is the one that's used to basically play the opening battle cutscene that we saw in the playthrough earlier. So this is what's called a triggered event graph. The way that this works is that the skirmish game controller will loop through all of the graphs that are defined for the room, determine which ones are ready to execute, and execute that first one until completion, because only one graph can execute at a time, and then when it's done, it will check to see if any other ones are ready to execute. The first thing this graph does is pause all of the AI bots so that the AI doesn't mess up anything while the cutscene is playing, because the cutscene you saw earlier is actually a mechanics-based battle. It's not like an animated sequence. So what this does is it gets the 2 relevant ships, issues a bunch of orders to them, like lock the target, fire the guns, fire a missile, move to this position, that kind of thing. And then the ships will be given those orders and begin to execute them. And all of these nodes run through instantaneously until we get to a blocking node, which in this case is the green one, which plays the cutscene. And then when the cutscene is done, since this is a mechanics-based battle, again, I want to make sure that the shuttle is actually dead at the end, so I just grab the CIC reactor and drive and kill those at the end of the script, and then let the AI take over again from there. Then we've got this second scripted event, which is what triggers the first wave to arrive. And so it waits the specific number of seconds once the dialogue's been completed, and then that triggers this, which basically takes all of the OSP ships that are in the room, tells them to begin the arrival sequence, and that's pretty simple. And then it sets a variable saying that the wave has been sent in so that we can check that to see if the objective has been completed. And that's because ships that are in inactive standby count as eliminated, so we need to make sure that the first wave has actually been sent in before evaluating whether or not we've successfully defeated all of the OSP ships and can mark the objective of retrieving the light cruiser as successfully completed. And then if our light cruiser is destroyed before the objective is completed, then that counts as a failure. And for the final graph-based thing, we have AI strategy scripting. This one is really straightforward because this is just a simple annihilation battle. So this allows me to define AI specific behaviors that I want the AI to do for a room without having to write C# code and write individual strategies for, 15 different battle scenarios that I want to do. This one doesn't have any actual missions connected to the mission master, and that's because if nothing's connected to it, it just falls back to a simple annihilation strategy. But what this does here, what these purple nodes do, is it allows me to declare the specific task units that the AI is going to use and which ships make them up. But if there were specific battle actions that I wanted the AI to take, like if I wanted a specific group of ships to be attacking a certain ship that's allied to the player that they need to defend, then I could use these attack mission nodes and assign those units into it. Or if I don't attach any units to it, it will just use all of the AI units that are available and rank them based on the priority system that it has, and generate the attack missions for them. I can also define goals, like if there's a docking point that I want to defend. So if the player is trying to dock with it, I want them to suddenly have that ship be focused down by the enemy to prevent it from getting to that docking point. And that's what this goal will do. It will generate all the relevant missions, not just one specific type to accomplish the goal. There aren't many AI-based nodes at this point, and that's because this is probably the newest part of the scripting system, but I'm planning to make it pretty powerful because there are a lot of things that I'm going to need the AI to do to tell the story that I want to tell. And now the part you've probably all been waiting for, which is cutscenes and how you can make your own. So this is the built-in dope sheet editor that allows you to move anything around in the scene that you want and control it. This one is actually pretty simple because, as I said, most of the battle that you're seeing is a mechanics-based battle, so the orders get issued to the ships and then they carry them out, and so this is really just controlling the camera and playing the relevant dialogue. I've actually been working on this tool since about March, although it was one of those cases where I just kind of hit a brick wall on it, and so I put it down for a while, and then once I came back to it a few months later, I just kind of breezed through it. Like I just locked in and figured out exactly what I needed to do and put it all together and build a cutscene while I was making it and made sure that everything that I needed was in there. It's track-based, so you can add any track that you want, and there's a lot of different types, so you get these special ones like audio and animation and screen text, and then you also get a track for every entity in the room that you can place keyframes for. This first track here is the screen fade, so every cutscene starts at a black screen, but we just want to snap in on this one, so this will set the screen to be clear, not black immediately. The next line is dialogue, which allows us to select a character from the cast that we talked about earlier and select a clip. We can also write a subtitle, although since these are just placeholders, there's no clip associated with them, and I just wrote the subtitle myself. But if you do select a clip, there can be metadata associated with that clip that has the actual subtitle text in it, and you can override it if you want, but the metadata subtitle will be included in here by default. And then we've got the camera track, which allows us to move, rotate, and control the zoom of the camera. In order to help with lining up shots, there's a viewfinder, so you just right-click open the viewfinder, and we can now see the view through the camera, and we get this overlay on top which shows the black bars on the top and bottom and what's masked by them, and then this crisscross pattern that helps you arrange, the standard cinematic techniques of like keeping things in the third quarters and how you can line things up to make them visually appealing. It's just kind of an aid for that, and we can scrub through the timeline and see how the camera moves during that. The diamonds in the track are the individual keyframes for the position and rotation, but what's really special about this type of entity track is the gray boxes that you see here, which I call entity scopes. And this makes it so that any keyframes that are found within this block will be positioned and rotated relative to the entity that the block is assigned to. And that makes it so that during this battle, while the ship is moving in maybe an unpredictable manner because it's just receiving the orders that the script graph has given it, I can make sure that the camera is still staying in the exact position relative to the ship to get the shot that I want. And then I can also select the individual position keyframes, and I can tune their rotation and how their tangents work to make it so that the camera flows nicely along this spline and gets whatever curve I want it to. I can increase the tangent and make the curve more shallow. I can rotate it, I can twist it around. I can try to match the relative velocity so that things move slowly through the control points. This, I think, still needs some work, for example, detaching the tangents and making some auto-smoothing functionality, because getting the tangents to line up nicely can be kind of difficult, but for now it is serviceable. And now I just want to show off one more cutscene that is kind of a stealth tutorial on how to properly use beam destroyers, because I'm just happy with how it turned out. The last feature we haven't talked about in the room editor that's new is Skybox entities. So if you look closely, you can see the gas giant in the background of the Skybox, and by selecting it in the entity list, we can actually position it relative to the map and move this game object around in the Skybox. This is a better reimplementation of the camera stacked Skybox system that you may have seen on the Conquest branch. Not only does this fix the annoyance of the starfield being attached to the camera and so being able to clip through world objects, or for example during the arrival cinematic for the skirmish game, this makes it so that we can now have any game object that we want in the Skybox, and we can basically do anything that you could do with normal entities in the Skybox. It gives a lot more flexibility than we can get with like an HDRI. And if we make the planet bigger, we can see that I kind of added a special shader to the rings of this planet, which makes it so that you kind of get a shadow zone around where the camera is. And so it makes it so you can kind of look like you're in the rings and the dust is getting more attenuated as you get close to you. We can also spawn in additional planets. So if we go to the Spawn Skybox Entity button, and we select the planet item from there, we can place another planet anywhere that we want in the Skybox. These planets unfortunately have to be predefined, but I'm hoping to get the ability to configure them into the editor at some point. But let's select the test moon one and position that as well somewhere nearby the map, so it looks like we're in orbit over this moon that is orbiting the gas giant. Scripts and cutscenes can also affect any entity in the Skybox because, again, they're just entities, so we can do whatever we want with them. So for example, if you wanted to have like a battle taking place in orbit of the moon in the background there, we could have particle effects that are making explosions in orbit, or explosions on the surface from cities getting bombarded or something, which may happen in the campaign for all you know. But I was really excited to get this back into the game to port that over from the Conquest branch because it just makes the background of the game way prettier and provides me lots of flexibility for storytelling through background kind of narrative elements. Before I show this next part, I want to be clear that this is not a skirmish mechanic. It is a narrative device only to enable things to happen in the campaign. I still think that boarding is an untenable mechanic in terms of the skirmish game. I think that there's no way to do it in a way that is both fair and fun and not overpowered. But I realized while starting to block out these rooms that it doesn't really make a lot of sense that a lot of these stations would just let you dock at any of their docking points because they control the docking collars, they control the docking clamps. So I added this boarding animation for certain points around the station that allows you to get a ship on there and like take control of the docking control and make it so that you can dock your other ships with normal docking points, because I've made it so that docking points can be disabled or enabled by script. And so this is kind of a way to get a foothold onto an enemy station. I think the animation looks really cool. I had a lot of fun making it, although it took a bunch of finagling to kind of get the cables to look good, like to make it look like they were getting paid out by inertia rather than just kind of getting wobbly according to a curve. But I think the result is pretty nice. And if you look really closely, when the cables go taut, there's a little wobble in there as they kind of settle into their normal tightness. But again, this is a narrative device only and is used for the purpose of getting footholds on station and telling the story. And it's not something that's going to be coming to skirmish. Stefmo has been in the middle of an art refresh for the ships for a while now, but that's not going to be ready to show in this devlog, so look forward to it coming up soon. But I also wanted to touch on the tech art side and improve some other aspects of the ships while we're doing just a complete overhaul of their appearances. So you may have noticed new engine effect particles and stuff, but damage has always bothered me a lot. So if you take a shot at the center of a large open face, it looks pretty good, but if you hit a corner like this, particularly a seam between two different parts of the mesh or faces that are not nearby on the UV, you get these ugly seams, these ugly cutoffs. So I went through and I rewrote the damage shader to make it so that the damage can now spread across all of these different unconnected faces and produce nice, clean, large blocks or large spheres of damage that don't care about the UV layout. They don't care about even different parts of the mesh. They can bridge two different segments of the hull, and it just looks so much better. It requires some additional data, but fortunately for the sake of mods, that can be generated at runtime, although generating it in your modeling software will make it look better. And then finally, as I started blocking out these rooms and starting to test them out, I very quickly realized that any kind of rapid iteration was going to be really difficult to do without some special tools to enable that. For example, this is only the second room from the starting room, but having to publish it, go to the main menu, start a new campaign, and fly to this room would have been untenable in terms of how I would be able to rapidly iterate and test things and find bugs. So I added this quick test from the current room feature. It allows me to select the difficulty, what room I'm arriving from, what visit number this is, so how many times I've been here before, if you have like a scripted event that occurs, if you happen to return to a room for the second time, for example. You can also edit the conditions of different variables, including the global variables. And then over on the right, you can pick which ships the player is going to have with them. So the ships that you get in a starting room will always be selected by default, but then it also shows you all the other ones and even gives you hints in terms of which ships are on the route from the starting room to the room that you want to test in. And you can also expand out by like 1 or 2 jumps. So if you're like backtracking off of the route, you can quickly add those ships as well. So it makes it so that you don't need to guess what ships the player could possibly have if they followed a reasonable route to get here. This has been a huge time saver in terms of making my iteration speed increased and making it really easy to just cycle through and fix bugs. Like there have been times where I've had to start the room over and over and over and over again in order to figure out something that was wrong, and that just would not have been possible. It would have taken me days to do that without having this feature. As I said, this is more or less all of the major campaign editor features, and we move on to actually building the campaign. We've been doing concept art for all the different rooms, I've been doing blockouts for them, I've been doing scripting, and pretty much all of the rooms leading up to the gas giant have been blocked out and started having their enemy units placed and their scripts built so that we can start getting to play testing. And I chose to do this devlog now because starting tomorrow, I'm basically going to be sitting down and playing through these first 2 zones over and over and over again and finding bugs and testing things and making sure that everything's working the way that I expect it to before passing it off to the testers to let them get a first crack at it. Developing all of these tools has consumed pretty much the entirety of the last 3.5 months, aside from time that I've been spending on main branch as well, but I think that all of the time that I've put into it has been well worth it, because now I can really iterate quickly, and making new rooms is extremely fast. The rest of the process should move a lot faster from here, and hopefully we'll be able to start getting into full-scale playtesting with the blocked out levels and rooms in just a couple of months, although getting each of these locations to final art is going to take a lot longer. But the most important part of the campaign is making sure that it plays well, that it's fun, that the story makes sense, that everything works correctly, and getting things like final art, voice acting, final cutscenes, writing, that kind of stuff is a thing that we can do once we know that the blockout versions of all of these rooms actually plays correctly and that the campaign is enjoyable. So that's it for this devlog. Thanks for watching.